Feast and Famine in Ethiopia, by Alex Dwell. Today, Ethiopia is a land marked by the starkest contrast, feast and famine. In Addis Ababa, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is holding a lavish celebration to inaugurate his new government, on a scale not seen since the coronation of Emperor Haile Selassie almost 100 years ago. There are vast crowds, parades, state banquets, and soaring speeches about Ethiopia's proud independence. In Tigray, children are starving to death in a man-made famine. Clinics and hospitals, stripped bare of even basic medicines, are filled with their faint, pitiful cries. The UN published some of its most disturbing statistics ever. Almost 4 out of 5 pregnant or nursing mothers were acutely malnourished. It's morally repugnant, and it's politically dangerous too. Heads of state and other international dignitaries arrived for the ceremonies at Addis Ababa's Bole airport over the weekend. If Abiy had his way, they would have passed by senior United Nations aid officials on their way out. 7 humanitarian professionals were given 72 hours to leave on Thursday. The UN challenged the legality of the order, so the deadline expired on Sunday with their position unclear. The official rationale for their expulsions is that they were meddling in the internal affairs of the nation. But it is no coincidence that the decision was announced just 2 days after the head of the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, expressed his view that the famine is man-made, can be remedied by the act of government. 3 months ago, the UN-authorized Famine Review Committee assessed the evidence for food security in Tigray, and concluded that without a huge aid effort and an end to the fighting, massive famine was all but inevitable by the end of September. In June, about 400,000 people were in famine-like conditions, and that number was certain to grow. In the last 3 months, less than 10% of the aid supplies needed for Tigray have reached the region, feeding just 126,000 people. The lack of food will mean that people will start to die, Griffiths said. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, said he was shocked by the expulsions. But he should not have been surprised. Abiy has made clear his intent to starve Tigray into submission, or worse, for many months. It has also been clear that he is following Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki's absolutist playbook, demanding that the UN be subservient or leave. It took willful optimism on Guterres' part to continue to express any confidence that the Ethiopian leader would relent and allow aid convoys to move. If the UN continued to try gentle persuasion rather than public pressure. Concern over armed conflict and food security was the rationale for United Nations Security Council Resolution 2417, which among other things reaffirmed that using starvation of civilians as a method of warfare may constitute a war crime. But international norms have not deterred the Ethiopian government and its Eritrean ally from committing the widest range of starvation crimes, causing famine and blocking relief. The slow and painful deaths of children and their mothers does not appear to disturb Abiy. Rather, he claims to be leading his country to fulfill its historical destiny of greatness. Abiy also claims an electoral mandate based on winning 95% of the seats in last May's election, a margin of victory that trumpets its hollowness. Abiy is hoping that the display of popular enthusiasm for his leadership will persuade his visitors, and the world, that he indeed has the mandate to rule a reborn Ethiopia and remold it according to his vision. Ethiopian rulers have a history of putting on carnivals while their people starve. Abiy is ignoring the lesson that man-made famine discredits the men who make famine. In 1973, while the Emperor Haile Selassie celebrated his 80th birthday with an opulent party, peasants were dying of hunger in Bole province. The imperial feudal system contributed to the famine, and the Lion of Judah, King of Kings, Elect of God, refused to acknowledge it, though he tried to shift the blame to his subordinates for covering it up. Haile Selassie paid the price. The legitimacy of the Solomonic dynasty wasted away and was overthrown the following year. In 1984, the military regime of Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam covered up the famine raging in Bole and Tigray so as not to spoil the 10th anniversary celebrations of the revolution, which included a military parade in Revolution Square of newly acquired Soviet weaponry. Mengistu's government notoriously stated that food is a major weapon against insurgents in Tigray and Eritrea and restricted and manipulated humanitarian aid. Its efforts to deny aid to the famished directly led to a massive cross-border relief operation into the rebel-held areas. Mengistu decried that operation as a violation of Ethiopian sovereignty, but it came about precisely because of his own abuses that discredited the notion of untrammeled sovereignty in favor of sovereignty as responsibility and the subsequent doctrine of the responsibility to protect. Abiy is ignoring the lesson that man-made famine discredits the men who make famine. Abiy's sumptuous replica coronation cannot bring him the legitimacy he craves. Only stopping the war, ending the atrocities, freeing the opposition and feeding the hungry can deliver him that. If Abiy continues to spend his country's scarce resources on fighting a war, it is not only Tigray that will face food crisis. Scarcities will mount throughout the country, and hunger will even visit the capital Addis Ababa. This will be the sovereignty of the famished, jingoism with an empty stomach. The link between war and hunger runs both ways. This was one of the fears expressed by the UN Security Council when it adopted Resolution 2417 in May 2018, recognizing the need to break the vicious cycle between armed conflict and food insecurity. As Ethiopia slides deeper into food insecurity, it will become a more unstable and dangerous country. Humanitarian failure is already escalating the war in a direct fashion. The Tigrayan defense forces have taken the offensive, sending units beyond the boundaries of their region, saying they are determined to break the starvation siege by any means necessary. If the international community doesn't bring aid to end famine in Tigray, Ethiopia and the whole Horn of Africa will face a widening war. Guterres has protested the expulsions of his staff and demanded that Ethiopia allow them to continue their activities. He has pointed out that the formula of persona non grata does not apply to the UN and has asked for evidence for their alleged transgressions. But the Secretary-General didn't get the backing of the UN Security Council, which could not agree even on a timid statement at its meeting on Friday. Most likely, leaders didn't want to spoil Abiy's party or have their envoys feel awkward at the banquets tonight. Such acceptance of Ethiopia's fig leaf of national sovereignty is not only morally wrong but politically dangerous too. The hunger plan of Abiy and Isaias doesn't strengthen Ethiopia's sovereignty or legitimize its ruler. On the contrary, while hunger kills Ethiopians, a monumental famine will likely kill Ethiopia.
King of Kings, conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, light of the world, also the last emperor of Ethiopia. Haile Selassie goes by all these grandiose titles. He was, without a doubt, one of the major figures in African and world history of the 20th century. A 44-year-long reign that came to an end in 1975 in a prison of the same revolutionary military junta that had earlier overthrown him. Selassie was the last reigning representative of a 3,000-year-old dynasty, a direct descendant, according to legend, of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. He led Ethiopia, which itself had a remarkable history, the only African country to have never been colonized. Selassie himself, a strong voice of independence. Let's listen to a speech he made at the UN in 1963.
That until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, until there are no longer first-class and second-class citizens of any nature, that until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, that until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, that until that day, the dream of lasting peace and world citizenship and the rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained.
It is a speech that has gone down in history, even in the world of music. The words immortalised in Bob Marley's song, War. For those who follow the Rastafarian religion, Selassie is the Messiah. They wait still for his return. That then, the positive side of Selassie, the man who recreated and modernised his country. But at the same time, Haile Selassie preserved the feudal system. He was deaf to the demands of his people. He did little to help amid terrible famines in the countryside. In September 1974, he was overthrown in a military coup led by Colonel Mengistu. His official funeral had to wait until the year 2000, where it passed with little recognition. Today, so many years later, the memory of Haile Selassie still divides Ethiopians. Bastien Renouy and Elodie Cousin revisit the last emperor of Ethiopia for France 24.
Shashamane is a holy city, but you wouldn't know it at first glance. You have to walk its alleys to find out. Here we are in Zion, the promised land of the Rasta. The religion advocates the return to Ethiopia of the descendants of African American slaves. This memorial is dedicated to the life of Haile Selassie. The Ethiopian emperor offered the Rastafari community 200 hectares of land in 1948 to thank them for their support during the invasion of the country by Italian fascists in 1935. The influence of the last emperor, or Negus, is everywhere. The Rastafarian religion, created in the early 1930s after his coronation, takes its title from his birth name, Tafari Makonnen.
His uncle, Milik, gave the name Ras as a prince. Ras means prince. So Ras and Tafari combined together, become Rastafari.
Here, the emperor is regarded as the Messiah.
This was found in Yemen. What? Almost thousands and thousands of years ago. Yeah? Reincarnated. Same picture. Christ in his kingly character. So Christ in that time, and King Selassie in this time.
Haile Selassie himself was not a Rasta, but believers say Selassie prevented the colonization of Ethiopia and showed black people the way to freedom while allowing them to return to the African continent. Rastafaris are currently enlarging this tabernacle so that more devotees will come to pray to the emperor, awaiting his return. Zatu doesn't even believe that he's dead.
If the Queen of England or anybody dead right now, they're gonna show you that person in a box for a little while. Ethiopia say, move it for today. Them no one is not dead. So Ethiopia move it quick. Yeah, no one hasn't seen Selassie in a box.
Haile Selassie's death in 1975 is shrouded in mystery. The communist Derg that ended his reign in a coup d'etat refused any investigation into his death and hid his body. For decades, it was taboo to speak his name in public. The imperial family were persecuted, and some of its members went into exile. But the descendants of the emperor no longer need to live in hiding. Today, they have come from all over the world to attend the burial of one of their own. Prince David Makonnen, grandson of Haile Selassie, who died in 1989 and whose remains have until now rested in Switzerland.
Till his last days, he fought for the release of his family that were imprisoned in Ethiopia. And he fought for peace and security to be restored in Ethiopia after the revolution ensued. So today, it brings back many difficult, sad emotions, grief and mourning. But that's all right. It also feels good because today is the day we finally brought my dad back home.
Haile Selassie himself ordered the construction of this cathedral. In this fresco, the Negus calls on the League of Nations to stop the Italian invasion. The entire building is dedicated to the history of the imperial family. The crypt, hidden by this metal grille, holds the bodies of the monarch's descendants. Here, Ahmed Selassie, his first son, who died in the United States in 1997. And here, Makanan Haile Selassie, his second son. Joel Makanan grew up in exile in Geneva. He now lives in the United States and campaigns for the imperial history of Ethiopia to be more openly discussed.
Je pense que maintenant, les gens l'ont senti qu'il faut une réconciliation. Dans les années récentes, on a vu une resurgence en fait de l'empereur, de sa mémoire. Même le Premier ministre Abiy a fait des discours où il a parlé à propos de l'empereur, il a ouvert le palais de Ménélik pour que la société éthiopienne puisse reconnecter avec cet héritage.
Since the fall of the Negus, Addis Ababa has changed a lot. Almost 900,000 inhabitants in the 70s, more than 3 million today. And the legacy of Haile Selassie is becoming more and more visible. This video, broadcast at Meskel Square in the center of the capital, invites you to delve into the country's past. The former palace of Haile Selassie now houses the university. The emperor donated it in 1963. Dr. Ahmed directed the site for 10 years. For him, the palace must maintain the memory of the Negus, like here in the Makanan Hall.
John Kerry était ici, le chef d'État turc, le chef d'État d'Afrique du Sud. Tout le monde, le dirigeant mondial, quand il arrive, on les accueille ici. Mais pourquoi on l'a fait? C'est la mémoire de l'époque impériale. Donc, quand on monte vers la résidence impériale de l'époque, voilà la chambre de l'empereur. Regardez, on a bien regardé cet héritage important.
Dr. Ahmed is extremely proud. It was not easy to keep this place as it is. The Derg regime, a communist military junta, tried to make everything disappear.
Il y en a des bizarres qui arrivent. C'est quoi votre rassemblée impériale qui est vraiment inutile aujourd'hui? Mais non, pour l'historien, rien inutile. Pour les chercheurs, rien inutile. On ne peut pas prendre parti. C'est un héritage de plusieurs avantages parce que c'est lui qui nous a donné l'université. Donc on ne peut pas jeter par terre héritage de l'empereur Haile Selassie.
According to the professor, what must be remembered most is the emperor's contribution to Pan-Africanism.
C'est un père de l'Afrique qui dirige un pays jamais colonisé. Les relations internationales et les relations africaines sous la direction de l'empereur, c'était vraiment remarquable.
It is thanks to Haile Selassie that the headquarters of the African Union is today in the Ethiopian capital. In 1963, the emperor offered land and facilities to create the AU's predecessor, the Organization of African Unity, which would host the heads of state of the continent every year. Jean Fassoni has worked here for 30 years. Former Secretary General of the Commission, he knows the history of the organization like no one else.
Ici, c'est la grande salle de réunion des organes. C'est une salle dédiée à la conférence des chefs d'État et de gouvernement.
The original OAU sought to facilitate decolonization as many new states won their independence, but by the turn of the 21st century, more comprehensive reform was required. In 2002, the OAU was dissolved, making way for the African Union.
C'est selon sa vision de faire de l'Afrique une Afrique intégrée, une Afrique unie, une Afrique prospère, pacifique, qui est dirigée par ses propres citoyens et qui a une voix forte.
Encouraging mutual assistance and dialogue between African countries was Haile Selassie's credo. In February 2019, the organisation brought his influence to the fore by unveiling this statue opposite the main entrance. Inside the building, a photo gallery pays homage to the founding fathers and the heroes of Africa.
Patrice Lumumba, comme vous le savez, il est de la République démocratique du Congo. Il a été assassiné, mais c'est lui qui a conduit à l'indépendance. Le président Nelson Mandela, auquel la salle est dédiée. Le président Léopold Sédar Senghor du Sénégal.
Among all the portraits, that of Haile Selassie is of paramount importance to him. In 1963, his mediation enabled the signing of the OAU Charter, despite the antagonisms between two groups with different ideologies.
Ce qu'on appelle les intégrationnistes et les gradualistes, ceux qui voulaient un continent uni, un gouvernement des États-Unis d'Afrique, immédiatement, avec à leur tête Nkrumah, et de l'autre côté, les gradualistes, à leur tête Houphouët-Boigny, Félix Houphouët-Boigny de Côte d'Ivoire.
But while tributes are made to his work establishing the AU and developing Addis Ababa, the Negus also left a much darker legacy. In the north of the country, the villagers of Adi Kanat still remember the famines that killed hundreds of thousands of people during his reign. In 1958, 1966 and 1973, drought brought starvation to communities far from the capital. The emperor did nothing to ease their suffering and even tried to prevent the news from getting out.
تهزقن كندي سبلي مرأي أو رقيف تعرفه ثلاثة بحال قرقال أربعة بحال قرقال خمسة بحال قرقال لا تقبل رأسه.
From the 1930s onward, multiple rebellions broke out among the inhabitants of the Tigray and Bole regions, who complained of being forgotten by Haile Selassie. In response, the emperor let them starve. But in 1973, the famine could not be ignored. Students demonstrated in the capital, and the military stepped in with a coup in April 1974. Half a century later, the situation has changed, and Mbeye's fields are lush.
وحبرتسبنا ما ينترخوا بفلاي ما حصر سقاط مننا بطعم طقامايو.
Despite the late arrival of the rainy season, Mbeye's land produces fruit and vegetables in abundance. The current productivity of his land is in part due to the agricultural policies of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, a member of the coalition that established the current republic in 1991. At the time, agronomists came to help the farmers and irrigation systems were widely established. Today, the trees remain green. Today, the people are worried about political change. After almost 30 years in power, the Tigray People's Liberation Front is now in opposition. Friction with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed means local Tigrayans once again fear marginalization and even another crisis. Like in Bole, the people of the region worry about the drought that is currently raging, and the political situation only aggravates this sense of unease. In Bole is the village priest. In consultation with other leaders from the Liberation Front, he is organising a meeting at this school. One of the leaders opens the debate.
ተፈጥረኻ እንደገና ዘሎ ተፈጥረልና ከመልና ካና ኻነሱ ሕልፍለ ዝናረ ተፈጥረው
some fear the region is headed towards a repeat of 1973.
أو زهزنيو قدماي مينستر كان تايل مسل وهد بارتيل بحال انت خوينا حدا سب عند حرق زي وال إثيوبيا انت يتهون لا تنورتنا هسي هاي لا سجزاتون كو نسب على أتقلبت الآية خلدي سلازلو أنا سأجم من الوجه أو زفلا لا يجنيو سنا هسي هاي لا سرعت قل كيم لا سجات سنا قدماي مينستر جن.
Mbaye wants to calm the tensions. The political situation is worrying, but for the moment there is no shortage of food. Despite his concern, the old man refuses to draw a parallel between Abiy and Haile Selassie. But the legacy of the Negus still hangs over Ethiopia and troubles the inhabitants of the country's north. Between his admirers and those who suffered under his authoritarian rule, Haile Selassie continues to divide.
Bastien Renouy and Elodie Cussin revisiting the last emperor of Ethiopia for France 24. That's all from this week's edition. Of course, you'll find it on our website and all the previous editions as well at france24.com. More news very shortly. Thanks for watching.